At this point, it has been 4 days since the release of Shadows of the Erdtree, and I must say this might be one of the greatest DLCs in gaming history, up there with Blood and Wine. Just an amazing experience through and through, with amazing level design, great scenery, amazing boss fights, and of course, spectacular lore. Many still to be uncovered, but still, here are 5 lore discoveries that I have made through my playthrough so far within the Lands of Shadow. Be warned though, these will contain heavy spoilers for not only the Lands of Shadow, but possibly the base game of Elden Ring as well. So here are now 5 discoveries that I have made so far in the Lands of Shadow. Firstly, did you know that Rennalla had a sister, or has a sister? Apparently, the House of the Full Moon had 2 prodigal royal daughters. Rennalla of the Full Moon, the elder and current ruler of the House of Caria, and Rennalla, the younger sister, who eventually went on to become the Knight of the Twin Moons. The sisters grew alongside each other as members of the Carian royal house, but eventually Rennalla herself renounced her lineage to chase after Messmer. She chose to stand by his side, knowing full well that not even the brilliance of the moon could grant him any succor. And in time, Rennalla herself became known as the Sword of Messmer due to her devotion to him. Rennalla is perhaps the very first truest skill check within the Lands of Shadow for the players. As a boss battle, she employs some amazing movesets, and she is really entertaining to fight, and she also hits like a truck. Befitting of her lineage, she is a spectacular warrior and sorcerer. And apparently, that skill and that charisma of hers also granted her some modest but still powerful followers. For as she abandoned her royalty, her royal lineage, there were those that left alongside her, as Rennalla's cameo talisman would say, as engraved as a reminder of the unparalleled devotion of those who left their homelands to serve Rennalla. By your leave, we will accompany you wherever your lunar vessel takes you. Also, it is said that in her departure, Rennalla herself gifted her sister a piece of her lustrous black hair, something to remember her by. The implications of Rennalla's existence here is interesting to contemplate, because this means that either the House of Gold and the House of Moon held political relations far earlier than the war between Caria and Leyndell, or perhaps that the conflict within the Lands of Shadow happened a lot later in the timeline of the Lands Between than I originally expected, and probably you originally expected. Although keep in mind that nothing here can actually prove that Rennalla took part in the conflict against the Hornsent, it's still interesting to ponder that she received quite the renown while serving Messmer, while following Messmer in his footsteps, in his cause. After all, she is remembered by as the Sword of Messmer. But if there is one thing that I can say for certain is that both her and her sister had a particular taste in red-haired men. And speaking of red hair, General Radahn, the famed Scourge of the Stars, apparently had a friendly rival during his youthful years, and this rival's name is Commander Gaius, a monstrous knight with great finesse with gravitational magic who rides atop a giant boar. Gaius was once the most senior student of the same Alabaster Lord that taught Radahn his own gravitational magic. Both Gaius and Radahn seem to have enjoyed a friendly competitions during their youth, and those competitions eventually resulted in at least the creation of one powerful gravitational sorcery. Also, most curious about Commander Gaius is that he is actually a first generation Obnoric, as seen in Gaius Greaves that he was in fact a warrior of Obnoric extraction. These trousers were made for him as a cruel joke, for of course being an Obnoric he could not have usage of his legs, and as such he could never wear these greaves. Although I must say I legitimately doubt that anyone had the courage to make that joke to his face. Moving on. From Software seems to have a knack for designing excellent dragon battles for their DLCs, and this time the star of the show is Bayle the Dread. Bayle the Dread is a mighty and feared ancient dragon, and possibly even a former political player in the prehistorical era of the Lands Between. One that apparently possessed a really violent rivalry with Placidusax, the ancient dragon lord and former Elden Lord of the Lands Between. As stated in the Talisman of the Dread, Bayle was a terrible harbinger of destruction, who once challenged the ancient Dragon Lord, a battle which resulted in grievous injuries for the both of them. This is a huge piece of lore information because it implies that this is the dragon that actually severed the heads of Placidu's sex instead of Godfrey. For a very long time it has been speculated by the lore community that Godfrey was the one to behead most of the Dragon's Lord's heads, but perhaps it was in fact another of his kin that truly dealt such grievous blows to the ancient Elden Lord. So the dragons were not as united as we originally expected, and they also fought their wars internally. Now this might be a juicy one. If you are one of those who subscribe to the idea of Melina being the child of Marika, well, you guys can rejoice. Although her name is not mentioned, after you defeat Messmer the Impaler, you will receive a particular item which is called Messmer's Kindling. An item which says, much like his sister, Messmer foresaw a vision of fire. The only other character that have mentioned to have dreamed of walking the fire towards the fire or seeing the future of fire was Melina herself. Both of them sporting of red hair, which is by the way a nice touch from Software, since in their lore, in the lore of the Lands Between, it is stated that the fire giants had red hair. It is cool to see that creatures that are so intrinsically connected to fire will eventually have red hair. More interestingly, you can see that both Melina and Messmer were born for a very particular purpose, while the other demigods seems to have been free in what they did with their fates, with their lives. Both Melina and Messmer do not seem to be the case, and they were forced down a very gruesome path by their mother, Marika. But albeit in different ways, they are similar in their fates, but they fulfill it differently, or at least different purposes for that matter. Both of them were kindling in order to burn something. But where Melina would kindle herself and burn herself alongside the Erdtree, Messmer would be forced onto this crusade against the enemies of his mother, burning others instead of himself. And lastly, perhaps one of the most important lore discoveries of the Lands of Shadow, and perhaps the whole of the Lands Between, we finally come face to face with Saint Trina. After defeating the Putrescent Knight boss, walking down a small purplish cave, we find the sleeping figure of Saint Trina herself. Although not in a very talkative mood at this point, we can still imbibe ourselves with the nectar that she produces. I must warn you though, the effects of it are not desirable at all. Saint Trina has been the topic of speculation for a very long time within the Elden Ring lore community, and to finally meet him, we finally can get some somewhat conclusive evidence. There's still a lot to uncover within the Lands of Shadow, but throughout our way into finding Trina, which by the way for me was completely random, I just accidentally stumbled upon the pathway towards her, I find two interesting things. The first was a ghost and a cross of Mikola. Both of them seems to imply that perhaps Saint Trina, instead of what we originally believed to be simply an alter ego by Mikola, a name that he used to walk by the Lands Between without being noticed of being Mikola himself, was in fact a part of himself. It seems that, or at least it is speculated and implied, that Saint Trina is part of Mikola, the same way that Radahn is part of Marika. Two halves of the same coin. A piece of Mikola that he apparently abandoned in order to arise into godhood. But still, there is a lot more to uncover within this amazing DLC. So I must ask you, how has been your experience so far within the Lands of Shadow? Are you enjoying it? Did you find many lore discoveries? And are the weapons and bosses and locations intrigue you as much as intrigue me? Leave it down in the comments. I always enjoy talking about lore and speculating on what could and could not have happened within the Lands Between. This has been the Discount Russian. I hope you have enjoyed the video. Consider liking and subscribing. I'll see you next time. Peace.